Okay, so it is 4:45 and it is coming from Kalamazoo, Michigan. It is Raven and this is the Diss Factor. And unfortunately, I talked to my sister today and one of the things that was kind of the unfortunate thing when you're speaking to family and you have various individuals about the globe involved in the military is that you often wonder how close are we to the actual doomsday clock? One of the things that I actually always said, because I was actually around when, Mayor McCheese was actually running for, well, when Mayor McCheese, long before he decided to run for president and run our economy into the ground, make us a laughing stock and actually destroy the reputation of the U.S. military forces, especially that of our naval forces, was he was basically known as a failing businessman whose daddy always had to bail him out of trouble. Those kids that always seem to get in over their heads and they have to wait for their rich dad to come and pull strings, use influence, and get them out of, whatever situation that you had gotten into with them and you were the one left holding the bag. Well, that's pretty much what our military forces are right now. And if there's one thing I would say is that, even though well, actually, I don't know if I can actually say that anymore that I respect our military forces. And for me as a veteran, that's actually difficult to say because how can you respect someone who actually goes about the globe engaging in genocide, covering up for a mass murderer, and knowing that they're taking orders from a boss who's basically being paid by Netanyahu? I mean, let's be real, folks. All right, let's put aside the games. Let's put aside all the nonsense. One of the reasons they keep censoring us wherever we go is because they don't want the G word mentioned or say genocide actually spoken. It's kind of like when they got into the films and they started saying, well, you can't say murder, you have to say eliminate. Like, ooh, eliminate. Like it's cool to eliminate or actually to murder someone. The right now, the things they don't show you on the actual news networks is one of the things that I'm actually going to show you here is we go to Ben Misalis over at Media's Touch, and he's actually going to tell you something about what actually is going on, what Rachel Maddow is getting paid about $30 million a year not to tell you.
Putin just put him on blast and made a public ultimatum trying to call Donald Trump and Trump's regime out. Putin said that yes, he is giving intelligence to Iran, but he said that he would stop giving intelligence to Iran to help Iran target American soldiers, kill Americans, and harm American interests so long as the United States cuts off support to Ukraine, Politico reports. Now it's being reported that the U.S. At a military level is rejecting this proposal, although Donald Trump has not commented, but this has left many across the world incredibly nervous that this is a deal that Donald Trump is contemplating. Moscow proposed a quid pro quo, and Donald Trump loves quid pro quos to the U.S., although Donald Trump never makes good on his side of the quid pro quo, unless it's Vladimir Putin, under which the Kremlin would stop sharing intelligence information with Iran, such as the precise coordinates of U.S. military assets in the Middle East if Washington...
Now, this is where I got to pause things. Because sometimes, and this is why I tell you, even when it comes to me, look and see if even what I'm saying is actually factual or biased. One of the things that America's always done, which really we need to be, I'm going to be honest, ashamed of ourselves for, is always having this big bad boogeyman somewhere in the world. Let me be honest with you. When it came to the Ukraine crisis, it was not Russia, big bad Russia that started that. It was not the Russian Federation. If you actually had take the time and you actually go to experts like Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, who we all love, and not just on the left, but even moderates, because one, he is Jewish, so don't say that what he's telling you is biased. Two, he's actually a person who was very well known and very respected in all circles, no matter what side of the fence it is, left, right, center, it doesn't matter. And he will tell you, Putin had nothing to do with this war. He had nothing to do with anything Donald Trump is doing. So the whole thing of Putin being Donald Trump's boss, no, Netanyahu is Donald Trump's boss. And if you go to the Professor Jeffrey Sachs and you actually listen to what he's saying, he will tell you that that is actually factual, because guess what? When it came to the war, when it came to the Ukraine crisis, the Russian people actually wanted, believe it or not, Putin to actually just put an end to it. To just literally go in, put an end to it, take out the Ukrainians, and move on with their lives. That's not what we were told through network news. And unfortunately, and that is one of the things that makes podcasting not only so crucial, but the thing that actually makes it so valuable, because as we run into more and more contradictions, deep fakes, misinformation, disinformation, one of the things that is actually going to actually end up taking place is that eventually, I'm predicting at some point, we are going to actually literally abandon network news. And that is what makes things like PMN, public network media, so important. So it's not just a matter of coming down and podcasting or learning how to edit. And I know those of you who, trust me, I've had my round with DaVinci, and there are things I would love to do to DaVinci that I can't even mention. And there are those who like would put a medal on DaVinci. But one of the things that actually is needed, and I'm going to tell you up front, because if we don't start supporting things like public media network, we're not going to know who is telling us the truth and who isn't. Because as you're paid by these networks, and like I said, Rachel Maddow, look it up, $30 million a year to tell us what her boss wants us to know. And I'm going to tell you something. Why would Rachel Maddow have any reason to tell us the truth at all? I'd have to say, if I was getting paid $30 million, I don't know if I would actually tell you the truth about what's going on. I really can't say that. But we're going to actually go into Professor Sachs and see what it is that he has to say about the entire or thing about the Ukraine war, because these things are very much connected.
The United States has not.
I see no.
In public, the United States.
I see no.
In public, the United States has not taken any measures that would actually lead to an end of the war in Ukraine. I put it on the U.S. side because I believe that this is a war fundamentally provoked by the United States over a 30-year period, actually. It's a war of NATO expansion. That is an effort that began in the 1990s, contrary to the promise that the United States had given to the Soviet Union and then to Russia, that NATO would not move 1 inch eastward. But when the Soviet Union ended in 1991, the United States reneged on its promise and began NATO enlargement. In public, the United States has not taken any measures that would actually lead to an end of the war in Ukraine. I put it on the U.S. side because I believe that this is a war fundamentally provoked by the United States over a 30-year period, actually.
Now, let me explain to you, okay, exactly what happened. Believe it or not, the boogeyman, Russia, actually approached NATO and was willing to become a member of NATO. Now, that was denied. This is the thing about money, people, and politics, and you need to pay very close attention. And it's this. We all have a price that we're able to be bought for, where we literally sell out. And right now, and especially when it comes to the Congressional Black Caucus, which I myself do not plan on voting for Hakeem Jeffries, because guess what? Hakeem Jeffries, much like Cory Booker, is a friend of AIPAC. How could I vote for someone who actually allowed the state of Israel to come to the United States and threaten black Americans, talking about they were the next threat after Palestine? See, this is when it comes to people like Jeffrey Sachs and history. See, we prefer to get our information, and I used to talk about this when I was a kid, because when I opened up a bubblegum wrapper and I saw just little bits of information there, and I thought, wow, cliff note to history. But what happens when, and I remember when I was a kid and I called it GBI, graphic bits of information. I had no idea that when I was 15 and making that statement and inventing that terminology, graphic bits of information, that there was going to be anything called the internet, let alone deep fakes or, video games that would make you question reality. Because now what is it? I think it's the DLSS system, where you actually can make the character on the video game look pretty close to being real. So in a world of graphic bits of information, folks, I'm telling you, kick to the curb your biases. Pick up a book called History, not the ones you got in high school, where you were literally indoctrinated into. And in fact, we're no longer calling it white supremacy anymore within the black community. We're now calling it what it is, which is basically white narcissism. And what's meant by that is very much, if you look at the terminology of narcissism, it is very much an individual who has an overwhelming sense of self, believe they are the center of all existence, cannot take criticism, will do everything imaginable that is in no way, shape, or form Christian, like the national white Christians in the United States, which is basically just another word of saying Nazi, and make up all kinds of excuses to why they can lie, cheat, steal, kill, but yet for someone else, it's a sin against God. They should be utterly ashamed of themselves and they're going into hell. But as our soldiers were told, well, this war is to bring Christ back to earth so that we can experience the rapture. And you know what's so funny about that? The very people who are intentionally waging this war, who caused this war in the Middle East, are the very people who believe that somehow if they bring Christ back to earth, they're going to go to heaven. I don't know. Can you say cult? Because that's exactly what a cult is. And for a long time, the white Christian nationalists in the United States have actually been nothing more than a doomsday cult. A cult of death, hatred, racism, misogyny, and false history. One of the things that actually, I don't think they even told you this weekend, was the fact that, and this is how this war in Ukraine connects to the Middle East. Because, first of all, if you've had history and if you've had political science, you will understand that there is this little thing called the World Island. Now, back in the day, and I forgot the guy's name, there was a guy who actually, and you can look it up, talked about the World Island. Asia, Russia, Africa, the Middle East. If you control the world island, you control the world itself. See, all of these wars in the Middle East and the global South is not about bringing democracy on our little white horse. We're going to ride in and save the day with the cavalry. No, it's about transplanting white nationalism in every nation possible. Most of these wars that we call capitalist wars now are basically wars of white nationalism is what they really are. Have you ever wondered why Christianity and capitalism are so interwound hand in hand? I used to wonder about that when I was a kid, because at one point I got tired of the fact that someone kept telling me that in order to be a good Christian, I had to believe in capitalism. And then one day, out of the blue, I met an older white guy, and I was playing chess with him, and he totally blew me away, because middle class, white, probably in his 40s, home, Christian, and the guy turned to me and said, capitalism is the most demonic system on the planet. In fact, it's not only ungodly, it's uncivilized, because that is not how human beings were actually meant to live. So for me, at 18, hearing that out of the mouth of a white guy, I was like, wait a minute. I think I may be in the because guess what? And I had to look at him and say, what white guy says that? But this guy went to church, took care of his neighbors, and I would see him with people who were poor, treated them like they were human beings. This is the problem. See, we looked at the Ukrainians as the white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed saviors of democracy, saving the world from ego communism. Okay, let's break some things down. First of all, how many of you have even read the book De Capital, or Capital? Well, first of all, communism, or the book Capital, was not about an economic system in terms of how to carry one out. Instead, it was actually about a critique of capitalism, is what it was. That's what Marx was writing about, a critique of capitalism. And not only was he writing a critique of capitalism, it was actually, guess who? Adam Smith, the father, the so-called father of modern day capitalism, that actually inspired him to write the book Capital. But how many of you are actually taught that in school? Probably none. This is why when we don't take the time to actually study, to really buckle down, hit those books, break away from Rachel Maddow. I know a lot of you just like, Rachel just kind of lulls you to sleep. But when you do not do that, guess what happens? You end up living here. And then, when Fantasyland gets broken, you go there. In the United States, we have since this country's been created, we've had a tendency to go here or here. All because we're too lazy to even know our own history. One of the things that we need to really look at, which even Dr. Jeffrey Sachs himself is kind of getting afraid of, is how this war is progressing. So we're going to cue in to Dr. Jeffrey Sachs right now in order to really see what he has to say about this. Remember, I would not give you a list of names of people that I had not already viewed and checked out. So when it comes to General McGregor, Colonel Scott Ritter, and I've told you before, Colonel Scott Ritter was there when they were writing all the rules and so forth about nuclear inspection. Dr. Jeffrey Sachs is another, has been around forever, was there when a lot of this stuff started. Stop listening to the neocons. Stop listening to the White House. Stop listening to your friends who neighbors who just, every time you tell them that Israel is the bad guy, either put their hands over their ears or walk away going la 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 because they don't want to hear it. They've already been indoctrinated into what to believe about the world. And unfortunately, that's what's pushing us closer and closer to a doomsday clock.
Is Ukraine. Every word of his, every statement and promise turned out to be false. And we have the wars in the Western Hemisphere, in Venezuela, which is still an ongoing war zone despite what you hear, and in an imminent attempt by the United States to overthrow the government of Cuba. And Trump met with several right-wing Latin American leaders and talked about new military operations throughout the Western Hemisphere. Our government is out of control. There is no constitutional order, and there is no sense in what is happening. And the wars are going to spread because of a absolutely deranged president, an out of control CIA and military, and absolutely crazy allies of the United States, starting with Israel, which is certainly the greatest rogue state on the whole planet.
What happens if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed for a substantial period of time, and what would that substantial period of time be?
Well, we already see the cascading effects of oil well above $100 a barrel and continuing to rise. This will be, as the International Energy Agency has declared, the greatest supply-side disruption of hydrocarbons, oil, and gas in history. From previous such disruptions, such as two that occurred in the 1970s, the consequences for the world economy will be absolutely dire, if not catastrophic, because oil prices will continue to soar. Oil production in the Middle East will cease, both because there's no storage or shipping capacity, and because the fields, both in Iran and in the Gulf, are being destroyed by attack. So we're both attacking the physical infrastructure, and fields are being shut in because there's nothing to do with the possible production. So we're in for an economic crisis of massive proportions. The extent of this crisis will depend on whether the world tells Netanyahu and Trump, stop breaking the entire world, go home, and stop your games. If that happens, this crisis will be very serious and costly, but not devastating. If it doesn't happen, then the consequences will be.
Who or what could stop the Israelis and the Americans from this catastrophe, the carpet bombing of Tehran and the expansion of the war?
Well, first, the Arab countries could, in principle. They house military bases. They should, if they had the guts, but they don't. But they should tell the Americans, leave. Go home. You're not giving us security. You're destroying our security. You're destroying our countries. You're destroying our economy. That's what they should do. That by itself would be enough to stop, because the U.S. ability to project power in the region depends on the militarization by the United States of the region. And that is also the same reason why these countries won't do what I just said. They're basically vassal states of the United States, which is very sad for them, very sad for us, because we suffer the consequences of the resulting Trump megalomania and U.S. government megalomania. The other way to do this is for the major powers of the world, that are not the United States or its vassal states. And that today is largely defined as the so-called BRICS countries should, in a unified way, stand up clearly and say to the United States and Israel, stop. Enough of this tragic absurdity. It's tragic because it's devastating. It's absurd because a child would not have gotten into this mess that we're in, but Trump is less than a child in the logic of his thinking. We have
Now, let's stop for a minute. Even when I was a kid, I was told, Israel's a good guy. They're fighting for their lives. Those wretched Palestinians over there are driving them into the ground and threatening their existence and blah, 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 blah. One of the things that I did not know until I was in grad school, believe it or not, is I was shown pictures of black Palestinians. Not olive, not near white, black Palestinians. The other thing I didn't know was the Balfour Accords. Now, for those of you who do not know, and really, believe it or not, many of you are instructors in college, let alone in high school, are going to bring up anything called the Balfour Accords. Very important, America, especially those who call themselves white Christian nationalists, or as I call them, Nazis. Because when you read the Balfour Accords, what you find out is that, first of all, Ben-Gurion, the Zionists, knew that there were people in Palestine, had been there for thousands of years. Two, they were actually relatively at peace with everybody, the Palestinians, the Muslims, what few Jews that were there, and Christians, until Ben-Gurion showed up, until Golda Meir, until the events that took place, the Nasbar or whatever they call it, actually occurred. We were fed one, and this is why you should never again, ever, trust a podcaster, a news anchor, or even a reporter, or a newspaper, unless you have actually picked up a book. And I suggest you pick up a number of them. You have Kindle. So instead of watching those cat videos and those videos where everyone on TikTok is trying to outdo everyone else by being as ridiculous as they can, actually breathe through. I mean, the fact that more people don't know about the Balfour Accords actually to me is shocking, because they show you the entire documentary on YouTube. But everyone knew that the Palestinians were already there. So when you hear this nonsense about, well, there was no one there was no train, there was nothing like that, it was empty land, no. There was already a civilized people there that they took land from, that they began to run off their land, and that both Britain and eventually the U.S. came to support, because they were supporting settler colonialism. That's what they were supporting. Because, let's face it, Israel is basically nothing more than the last bastion, like the Catholic Church, the last bastion of white male supremacy. Is basically what it's been all this time. Many of you don't know this, and you can look it up. At one point after the Holocaust occurred, Germany had actually thought of giving the Jews a part of Germany as their own. They did not want that. In fact, at one point, Ben-Gurion wanted to claim that part of Africa was the Holy Land, a land that they were entitled to. What upset me about all these wars in the Middle East, and especially about the state of Israel and the rest of us, see, we don't talk about the 10 million people in the Congo who underwent a genocide due to King Leopold. We don't talk about the fact that the nation of black Americans themselves underwent a genocide. About the 1.5 million that lost their lives that were forced to cross the Atlantic in horrific conditions, then how many of them died being raped, brutalized, starved, and just hunted for pleasure and used as anything from pillow stuffings to hats. Why is it that the only genocide that gets brought up that everyone is forced to focus on is the Jewish genocide, the Jewish Holocaust? The indigenous people of this nation, the Americas, had a genocide. Why don't we know more about their genocide? Why don't we know more about the genocide in Somalia and the Congo, or the genocide that occurred during and because of the transatlantic slave trade? There's a reason why we don't know more about these genocides. When the Balfour Accords were created, when the British and eventually the Americans helped to set up the State of Israel, along with the Rothschilds, what was really at stake with this? We need a place in the Middle East that is basically nothing more than a means of us being able to establish a military outpost in which we could influence the politics of that region, engage in regime change, and ensure that we possess oil. You know, there was a little movie created about that, and it really is a movie that has actually captivated us from the beginning. And really, you see it being played out day after day. In fact, I think you actually know this movie by now because it's becoming more and more famous.
In the year 6041, before the reign of the Padishah emperors, the universe was ruled by thinking machines with human minds, computers, and conscious robots. The people deteriorated into a state of apathy.
Let's hold for a minute. That kind of sounds like now, the upper 1%, AI. Robots that no longer look like robots, but are actually being used to replace human beings in a number of occupations. Who would have thought that Frank Herbert, the writer of Dune, wouldn't have been writing about a far distant future, but more so writing about 2026.
Then they became victims and slaves of other men with machines. Finally came the Great Revolt, the religious crusade against the machines. After the Great Revolt, human beings were forced to develop their minds. Thus, mental training schools were established. these schools would change the history of the universe. Only 2 of these ancient mental training schools remain. One is the Bene Gesserit School, which was established primarily for female students. The function of the Bene Gesserit School is to carry on a selective breeding program among humans.
Now let's stop for a minute. A selected breeding school among humans. White Christian nationalism, religious revolt. If I were you, white America, I would start questioning, where are the white Christian nationalists leading you? First, they were anti-vax. We lost 1 million people under the first Trump administration because many of you believe that somehow vaccination of children caused autism or various other ailments. Some of you actually threatened to kill people who were wearing masks and attempting to stay 6 feet away. Others kept talking about the economy. And yet, do you realize that during the time of that shutdown, that miraculous things were happening on Earth? What were they? The ozone began to repair itself. The Italians stated that you could actually see to the bottom of the canals of Venice. In fact, they even reported dolphins coming into those canals. Other things had happened. Air quality started to become much higher. Fires began to decrease. Unlike the firestorms, or they call it the Martian summer of California, where you looked into the Californian sky in San Francisco and you thought you swore to God you were on the surface of Mars. Especially since everyone had to wear some type of respirator. Have you ever wondered why is it that Christianity and capitalism are always made to go hand in hand in this country? Then, on top of that, you had people actually beginning to leave television, to leave video games, and to literally begin learning how to do things like play music, paint pictures, engage in photography, read books. Why is it that in this country, Christianity and capitalism and consumerism, the 3 C's, are forced like a bad diet down the throats of Americans? And then you had the emergence of the trad wife. Really? How many of you ever saw the Stepford Wives? I think for some of you, you might want to actually go and look up that video. Might clue you into a few things. But let's go on and see how fiction and today's news actually seem to have been something written about by one man called Frank Herbert.
Now, the other existing school, the Spacing Guild, or the Guild, emphasizes pure mathematics. The Guild's space navigators, through the use of the orange spice drug, are able to fold space. That is, to guide spaceships without moving from one planet to another. It is through the Guild's monopolies on the economic life of the universe that make...
Okay, let's think about that. The Guild, the spice, a monotony. Many of you don't know, but the author Frank Herbert actually spent a great deal of time. It took him years to create the book Dune itself. And during that time, he had spent time studying subjects such as biology, history, sociology, and particularly the desert and even desert nations. I wonder where he got part of the idea for the spice from.
Powerful. Know then that it is the year 10,192. The known universe is ruled by the Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV. For many years, the Emperor Shaddam IV has ruled on planet Kaitan over all the great houses of the Landsraad. The great houses of the Landsraad are members of the royal families who rule or govern over the major planets of the universe.
Now, let's stop there. If a number of you have been watching, and especially Savvy Sabs, Savvy last week did a incredible breakdown of the Rothschilds, Rothschilds, how much they were behind the state of Israel, how much influence they had, how much wealth they possessed. And even now, the Rothschilds are very much involved in the state of Israel. In fact, it was actually Sir Rothschild you will read about a great deal in the Balfour Accords. Are you beginning to get the picture?
Feudal system of government. Two of the great houses of the Landsraad are the House of Atreides on planet Caladan, ruled by Duke Leto Atreides, and the House of Harkonnen on the planet Giedi Prime, ruled by
Wait,
Baron Vladimir.
does this guy remind you of somebody? Kind of a beast, reddish like a lobster, orange hair, that face that looks like I'm lost and partly mentally ill.
Harkonnen. In this time, the most precious substance in the universe is the spice melange. The spice extends life. The spice expands consciousness. The spice is vital to space travel.
So let's stop right there. See, this is why, America, when you don't pick up a book, but you are so busy running off to the movies, so busy listening to Rachel Maddow, listening to the neocons, so busy burning books that range from, let's say, intersectionality, 1619, Baldwin, and others. You actually end up seriously missing the picture. And it becomes easier for someone to come along and tell you that the picture that you should be seeing is an illusion, and the picture forcing you to see is what's reality. You need to really think about that a great deal. See, when I come in and bring in current events, I refer to science fiction, a great level of fiction, but not the usual Blurred, which is nerd. I'm actually the Blurred who actually loves hard science fiction. Great, yeah. Star Trek, I just want to not really have to think about anything. My favorite thing really when I was growing up was 1999 that came out of Canada. It was a lot more realistic. It's called FTL, which is really not realistic, really not practical, because the amount of energy you would need to go at the speed of light, well, it would take the entire universe to create that amount of energy, and then along with that, things like Dyson spheres, destroying an entire universe to make one plate so you can make this huge intergalactic ship. Or what's the other thing? Dark matter, dark energy, in order to run a FTL engine so you could run the speed of light so you could one day actually go to the planet Vulcan. No. I tend to be more along the lines of the Asimov. the Philip K. Dick, the George Orwell, those kind of guys. See, unfortunately, America, you have a tendency to want to actually live in Candyland, in Fantasyland. You want only to be told how good you are, how righteous you are, how godly you are, as opposed to facing the truth and facts about yourself. And now here we are. Here we are now in a situation where we are actually now looking at, well, let's kind of look into the one podcast I was telling you about, Sabby Sabs, because she's likely to tell you things that are actually true that you don't want to hear and that your beloved Rachel Maddow will never tell you.
This all starts here with Tulsi Gabbard. We have been asking for quite some time, especially since this war started with Iran, and of course the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. Where is Tulsi Gabbard? And why is she so quiet? Well, she's no longer quiet now. She just testified in front of Congress, and yes, they caught her in a multitude of lies. Before we get to that, I just want to take you back to what Tulsi said when she was running for president in 2020. Here's what she said about Donald Trump war with Iran. Trump promised to get the U.S. out of stupid war. Now he and John are in the launching us into a stupid and costly war with Iran. Join me in sending a strong message to President Trump. It's not war with Iran. Tulsi Gabbard, 2020.
President Trump promised us a campaign to get the United States out of stupid war.
Obviously, the war in Iraq, big fat mistake. We should have in Iraq, Middle East. Stop racing to top foreign regime. You know nothing.
But he's on the brink of launching a very stupid and costly war with Iran. We stop Trump from starting a war with Iran. The president is listed as National Security Advisor John Bolton and other in his administration who have championed the war in Iraq in the past and who've been pushing for war with Iran for years.
Our goal is regime change.
There is viable opposition to the rule of the Ayatollahs. The solution to change regime.
And others lied to us about the war in Iraq. They said that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and that he gave them to Al-Qaeda. It was devastating. Over 4,000 of my brothers and sisters in uniform were killed. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians killed. Trillions of our taxpayer dollars wasted. And Al-Qaeda and ISIS. But to this day, John says that that disastrous war in Iraq was the right decision.
Question that the Saddam was the correct.
So now we're being lied to again. Bolton and Trump push us closer and closer to a war with that would prove far more costly and devastating than anything we experienced in Iraq. It would result in far more American troops being killed and injured, cause great suffering for the Iranian people and others in the region. It would exacerbate the refugee crisis in Europe and risk direct U.S. conflict with Russia, conflict that could easily lead to nuclear war. So join me in sending a strong message to Donald Trump. The U.S. must not go to war with Iran.
Well, the interesting thing is, in 2020, when Tulsi Gabbard made this ad and that statement, she was correct that the U.S. should not go to war with Iran. She was correct when she said it would escalate relations with Russia and China as well. She was actually right. That's also why some people supported Tulsi Gabbard during that time, was because she was against.
Now, do you see the connection? See, you thought when I took that path to Putin and Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, how does it possibly connect to what's happening in Iran? And then, when I went into Dune, the analogy, and now to who I think is actually sexy. I may have a crush on Savvy, but who literally is telling you, showing you, with documented proof, that how this war connects to the war in Ukraine. See, America, this was part of your problem to begin with. You never had to pay for what you did to indigenous people. You certainly never had to pay for what you did to black people in this country. You have lied and lied and lied and lied to yourself about what you've done, who you've been, the history of this nation. You know how you get a spoiled kid? It's the kid you let run wild and you never do anything about their behavior. You never discipline them in any way. And then the next thing you know, the kid goes from robbing the candy store, or say stealing money out of the cookie jar, to stealing a pop can from the grocery store, to actually robbing the gas store, to eventually breaking into someone's house, to, you see how it escalates? You've never experienced the consequences you really should have experienced. So over time, you voted for someone like Donald Trump because you became someone like Donald Trump. There are all kinds of books that are literature and science fiction. They're really good science fiction that's based on history, economics, sociology, psychology. Dune happens to be one of them. And as I said, Frank Herbert spent some time in the Middle East. He spent some time with desert tribes. In fact, he actually was in World War II when oil began to become a big thing. America, you have spent so much time running from reality of who and what you are that now you wonder, why in the hell are you able to wake up one day and find yourself in a situation where you, not around, not some, excuse me for saying it, tall head on a camel riding through the desert. I hope I did a good enough southern accent. Are not the ones about to cause a nuclear war. It's you. The only thing I can say to you is, while there's still time, pick up and read a book for once. The only thing I can say to you while there's still time is, instead of listening to your ministers, who are maybe no more than synagogues of Satan, if you know what that even means, pick up the Bible and read it for yourself. And while you're doing it, actually have a history book there with you, and a concordia that explains to you what certain words mean. Stop running to church thinking that if you go on Sunday, pay your tithe, and then go and screw over your neighbor because of what color they are Monday, that somehow that gets you through the pearly gates. No, it doesn't. Because in the eyes of God, it makes you a hypocrite. It makes you a fool. Instead of listening to dog whistles, pick up some of those books you were so afraid of, like James Baldwin. Go Tell It on the Mountain or The Fire next time. Go look at some of those documentaries that dealt with the Tulsa Massacre, Rosewood, and others. Go look at your own history in Europe and see that before you actually expanded out from Europe, all you did was basically fight among each other, kill each other, rape and pillage each other. Go learn about the Berlin Conference, which you're once again attempting and talking about repeating in Europe, deciding that because Gianni, who kicked out the dictator that Europe put in place, that now that Niger is actually beginning to recover from Western dominance, that their children now have clean water, actually have schools, have hospitals, much like Ibrahim Traoré, that since they're now experiencing greater yields, a greater quality of life, that somehow you need to rush back to Africa and insert democracy and Christian values. when you, America, have no such thing as Christian values, let alone a democracy. Only those who actually fool themselves about who they are in their history become hypocrites that set the world on fire. You need to rethink your perspective, America. And as for the brothers and sisters in the military forces, put down the rifles, climb out of the tanks, leave the ships. We as Foundation of Black America are one of the most hated races on the planet when we've never done anything to anyone. Don't give the world a reason to hate us because you chose to follow a madman, because you chose to follow leaders who are corrupt like Hezwith. Don't give the world to hate us even more because you decided you needed to get white proximity in order to live in a place called America. Because the only reason why I'm concerned that America never wanted to give us reparations is because they knew what we would leave the hell up out of this. That's why they never wanted to give it to us. Get off those ships. Get out of those tanks. Walk away from those jets. Let this war of white capitalism, white racism, white nationalism go on without you. Because they will definitely burn the planet and not give a... and then turn and blame you. This has been This Factor. I am Raven, and it is now... I want to say 5:42 p.m. Friday. Read about it, think about it. And brother and sister, get the hell out of the military and let these white folks, if they want to, tear up the world without you. They've already done enough damage as it is. Good night.